Good morning and welcome back to another edition of Research Fantasy presents our MLB DFS pitcher picks for Wednesday, June 28th, 2017. All in all, I was very happy with our pitching options yesterday. On an 11-game slate, I'm not entirely sure, but I know Severino and Newcomb had to be some of the higher scoring pitchers on the slate, at least on DraftKings. Would have to imagine Scherzer was right behind there as well. For me, I was just lucky enough that I didn't play Scherzer in my cash games. Not that it really would have mattered, but I just liked how the Severino-Newcomb combo worked out, and I talked about that and a couple of times on the podcast yesterday. So all things considered, we've been doing pretty well in the pitching department over the last couple of days. We get a nice slate tonight. Unfortunately, we really don't get those pitching options that just make us salivate. So let's start things off with Ivan Nova, 12-8 on Fantasy Draft, 8,100 on FanDuel, 6,400 on DraftKings. And basically the deal with Nova is he's not a high strikeout guy. He's not a guy that he's never going to jump out at you as a guy that absolutely must be in your lineups. But he quietly puts together these Irvin Santana-esque games where he goes 7 or 8 innings with 1 run given up and 4 or 5 strikeouts. And at the end of the night, that's a fair fantasy score, especially when you're talking about an SP2 on 2 pitcher sites. He's taking on the Rays tonight, which is never a great idea to target them because while they have an extremely high K rate from both sides of the plate against both handednesses of pitching, they also carry high ISOs and hard hit percentages, so they're making heavy contact. It's hard, and a lot of this stuff leaves the park. You got multiple guys on this team with a ton of home runs. But, like I said, I think Nova mitigates that. He's got a pretty fair control, and he's a guy that just consistently flies under the radar because in daily fantasy, we want that guy who's going to give us 8 strikeouts a game. So we're willing to take performances from guys like Chris Sale, Steven Strasburg, who's on the slate tonight, who could give us 10 strikeouts, but are highly likely to also give up 2 to 4 runs per game. I like the safety with Nova, and I think you can be a little bit sneaky with him. Next up, Masahiro Tanaka, 16K fantasy draft, 8,900 FanDuel, 8,300 on DraftKings. In my opinion, Tanaka's being a little disrespected in terms of both fantasy draft and DraftKings on his price. And look, I get it. This guy has a negative outing back on 5/14, and he's been in the triple digits 3 out of the last 7 games he's pitched. But recency bias says the guy looks good. He has 8, 10, and 9 strikeouts in the past 3 games against the Angels, who don't strike out a ton, the Athletics, who do pose a problem to right-handed pitching, and the Rangers, who are a fairly good baseball team. He gets the Chicago White Sox, the same team we just saw Luis Severino have a very strong game against, and while I'm not looking for Tanaka to post double-digit strikeouts, if he can go 7 innings and get 8 strikeouts and give up 1 or 2 runs, that is an excellent outing. I believe it is Carlos Rodon on the mound tonight for the White Sox, and while I'm a believer in Rodon's overall talent, this is his first game coming off the DL. I think it's going to be tough for him to get back into the swing of things, especially going up against the Yankees lineup that is very potent. So where do we end things tonight? And I think that's both a good question and a very difficult decision. Right at the top, you have Steven Strasburg, who I just don't trust. I have no issues being completely upfront with that. It seems like everybody in baseball has a couple of guys who they just cannot get right, and Steven Strasburg is one of those guys. He can pitch 15 strikeouts one week and then have a similar matchup the next week and give up 5 runs with 5 strikeouts. All things considered, and in all honesty, Strasburg is a fine enough option. I just don't want to use him against the Chicago Cubs. Even though they are clearly struggling, They're not putting up a ton of strikeouts, and I definitely think that there is a higher likelihood that they make contact, and good contact tonight with Strasburg than they did yesterday with Scherzer. Darvish, again, is just someone who has not been able to stay consistent. His upside is there. 3 times this year over 10 strikeouts, and he can typically get it right around there. Takes on an Indians offense that's pretty tough. So, again, I'd probably limit that to tournament exposure. But if we're going to really play tournament exposure, I think Chase Anderson at 18.8 on Fantasy Draft, 9,100 on FanDuel, 9,700 on DraftKings. I think that people are going to look at his name, look at the price, and say, there's no way in hell I am playing Chase Anderson tonight. That's just a ludicrous price to pay for someone when Tanaka's $1,400 cheaper, and I get it that there's more of a name value to Tanaka, and that builds into part of why I'm saying this. But all things considered, it's a pitcher who's been pitching well going into yet another terrible hitting situation. But you have to imagine, for the most part, people are going to be off Chase Anderson. And this has been the mentality for Anderson over the past couple of weeks while he has been doing well, is that he's too, not in a great matchup, plays in a bad pitcher's park, but he continues to come through with good games. So I think while people may gravitate to the perceived strikeout upside of guys like Strasburg and Darvish, it's going to leave an overpriced Chase Anderson in a position where he has low ownership. And if that circumstance does take place and you do have ownership shares that are actually eclipsing what the field has on him, and he does well, you're going to move up much quicker. So for that reason, I really like Chase Anderson, but admittedly, I'm not a big fan of the pitching on this slate. I'm going to gravitate a lot of different directions. I think I might let hitting dictate a lot of my lineups today. But all things considered, top 3 favorite tournament plays of mine: Ivan Nova, Masahiro Tanaka, Chase Anderson. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to us below. Check us out at researchfantasy.com. Like us on Facebook at Research Fantasy. Follow us on Twitter at Research and Win, and join us again tomorrow.